Good afternoon, and thank you for joining us for NCEA's Committee-Driven Boards webinar. My name is Kate Reich, and I am the organizer for today's event. Before we begin, please know that all of your microphone connections have been muted. If you have any questions during today's presentation, please send those through the question box that appears in your GoToWebinar panel. To ask a question, use your mouse to click into the blank box area, type your question using your keyboard, and then click Send. We will also be featuring 3 polls this evening, so when the poll screen appears, please make your selection with your mouse and then click Submit. The webinar presentation will last 45 minutes, and any questions that you have asked will be addressed throughout the presentation and also during the remaining time. Later this evening, you will receive an email asking you to complete a brief evaluation about this webinar, and for those of you who are attending this webinar live, information about creating a certificate of attendance. I thank you in advance for providing us with feedback about today's webinar. We will also be sending you another email with instructions on accessing this recorded webinar and presentation files in another business day or two. Now I'm very happy to introduce Dr. Regina Haney of NCEA's Boards and Councils Department, who would like to share a few words with you all. Please welcome Regina.
Thank you, Kate, and welcome to you all. Often I'm asked, what can I do to get my board to stop micromanaging? Another popular question I get is, how can I get my board to be productive? How can I get my board excited about the work and responsibility of the board? A response to both these questions is the same. Your board must have committees. Or as our presenter this evening would respond, a productive, well-focused board is a committee-driven board. If it can be said that a chain is as strong as its weakest link, then it also can be said that a board's work is as effective as its committees. Active, vital, action-oriented committees make the board run smoothly, assist the administrator, and ensure governance that works. Our presenter today is a great advocate for committee-driven boards. His research, writings, presentations all focus on the why and how to set up and organize committees. But more importantly, he shows us how to do that. His Archdiocesan Board is organized into committees and therefore very productive, providing leadership and direction for the 60-plus elementary and secondary schools in the Archdiocese. His board is a model for other boards nationwide. Our speaker today coined the phrase or the term committee-driven boards because he not only uses that, but is a great advocate for them and therefore is the best person to present this webinar. He is Superintendent of Schools in the Archdiocese of Hartford. He is the regional representative for the New England area superintendents. And he's a great Catholic school servant leader. And he is most of all someone with a great passion for Catholic schools. So help me welcome Dr. Dale Hoyt.
Thank you, Regina, and thank you all for participating. It's a beautiful spring night here in Hartford, Connecticut. It's still a little bit light out, but it is spring, and thank God spring is here. I thought we could begin this webinar with prayer. In the name of the Father, and of the Son, and of the Holy Spirit, amen. God, our Creator and Steward, we ask for insight to creatively respond to the dilemmas confronted by school boards. We ask for courage to pose the thought questions to get clarity. We ask for openness to others' thinking and experience and expertise. We ask for energy and commitment to move forward the strategies that direct Catholic schools into a new day and hopeful future. In this way, we will make Catholic schools stronger. We will ensure centers of excellence, and we will make schools better than we found them. This we ask in Jesus' name. Amen. In the name of the Father, and of the Son, and of the Holy Spirit. Amen. Tonight's webinar is going to be centered right on committee-driven. I will be talking a lot about boards in general, but the structure of committee-driven boards is what this is all about. And I hope by the time we end this 45-minute session, you will feel very comfortable with what committee-driven boards are all about. Now, I ask if you have any questions throughout this entire webinar to please respond, write your questions, your thoughts, and throughout the webinar, Regina Haney will stop me and try to answer any questions that you may have. Usually I have a poll and trying to figure out who the audience is that are participating, who are participants. But to save a little bit of time, I'm going to move forward from the polls, but focus a little bit on the second poll, trying to figure out where the participants see themselves as the type of board that they are part of. And are you an advisory board, a body that participates in the policy-making process by formulating, adapting, and recommending policy to the person with authority to enact it? The authority is not bound by the board's advice. Or are you a board that has limited consultative board, a body that participates in policy-making process by formulating, adapting, and recommending policy to the person with authority to enact it? The person with authority is required to consult the board before making decisions in designated areas, but is not bound by the board's advice. Or are you a board of limited jurisdiction, also called a policy-making board, a body that participates in the policy-making process by formulating, adapting, and enacting policy? The board has been delegated final authority to enact policy regarding certain areas of institutional operation, although its jurisdiction is limited to those areas of operation that have been delegated to it by its constitution and/or bylaws and approved by the delegating church authority. Or are you a board that has full authority? Those boards are usually those people who own the school. But yet, when I say full authority, we have to be very careful. We call ourselves Catholic schools, so we have a responsibility to the bishop and to the Catholic community to make sure that our boards remain Catholic in nature. Or are you someone that you're not sure what type of authority you have? Take a moment and let me know where you stand as far as the type of board.
And Dale, I think most people knew right away 100% are advisory.
Right. So we see that it is an advisory board, and here in the Archdiocese of Hartford, we look at it as a consultative board. Let me talk a little bit about how to establish that committee-driven board. First of all, there are 7 steps. First step is to develop a plan and making sure that the board has a specific plan. Sometimes the school doesn't even have a plan, but the board needs to have a plan of where you're going, because that's how the committees will be formed and how they will move forward. Let me give you a few examples of what those plans could look like. Maybe you want to have, you're concerned about school safety. Maybe you're concerned that you need to be an outreach to other parishes, that you may be the only school in the town, but there's 5 parishes around you, and there needs to be a better outreach. Maybe there needs to be an outreach to the Latino population. Or you need to seek new members because your board is not strong enough, or you have members going off and you need to find new members with the skill sets that you need. Maybe your board needs to combat some of the high delinquency of tuition that's taking place at your school. Or your board needs to look at the mission or vision statement. Let me give you an example of how you would work through these 7 steps. Say the board recognizes we need to build a relationship with the parishes. What you will do is assign a goal. Now that a goal may be to be in constant communication with the neighboring pastors, pastoral council, school board, and even religious education director. Probably the board, the committee that would fall under would be mission formation or evangelization. And then you would have some people on that committee, a board member, who would serve as a chair, and they would go out and get 3 to 5 members that would help you to establish that goal, to help you move forward in establishing a partnership or parish outreach to those other schools. What is important, though, as you come back to the full board, you are sharing the results of what you're doing. I also think it's very important that externally the people, the constituent groups in which that board serves, needs to let everybody know what you're trying to do, and you need to monitor that progress. You know, it is very important that the board sees their work as being effective. What I recommend is once a year the board has a retreat. They get together, the administrator of the school shares some of the goals for the upcoming school year. Sometimes the board will want to align their work with those goals. Sometimes there's other goals that need to be worked on by the board. This will happen during this retreat, that you will set some goals and some objectives for the year. How to set the stage for an efficient board and committee work. I recommend that usually if you have committees that are running, your full board does not need to meet but 4 or 5 times a year, because in between those full board meetings, the committee should be working. Now, if you don't have a strong committee structure, don't immediately go and make it 4 or 5 times a year with your board. Continue to work on a monthly meetings as a full board, but maybe your goal is to move into committee structure and you begin to strategize. Over a period of time of a year or two, you'll find you will not have to meet as a full board on a regular basis of a monthly meetings, but rather 4 or 5 times a year. Another important part in working of an effective board is to acknowledge your accomplishments. Now, let me take the example of outreach to the parishes. You go out there, you meet with the pastors, you see that there's some connections taking place, and you come back to the full board. All of a sudden, maybe you'll have some board members that will be serving from those various parishes or on those committees. Or maybe you see a greater link between the school and the parishes. You should be coming back to the board saying, wow, this is great. We have followed what we wanted in our goals, and we have accomplished and contributed to advancing the mission of Catholic school education. I think it's important that each year, even each meeting, acknowledging the great work that the board is doing, the committees are doing at the full board meeting. Even at your regular committee meetings, you should be acknowledging that great work. Now, another poll that I had, and maybe we can look at, and don't have to do the poll, one person asked, Regina Haney at one time asked a group of people, what most keeps members from coming back? So there were a list that was out there. The majority of people said a sense of contribution and effective use of time. So I ask you, what about you? What makes you keep coming back as a board member? Rhonda from New York kind of shared her thoughts of why she continues to engage herself as a board member and working with a committee. I like that last piece that says a sense of satisfaction when we overcome obstacles. And boy, do we have a lot of obstacles to overcome in Catholic education. I think of demographic shifts that are taking place, especially here in New England. A lot of people are going to the South and Southwest, and so we have to deal with that, and the board is helping with that. I think of the financial issues that we are faced with, those obstacles there, or the unchurched that are now coming into our Catholic schools that really have no understanding of the Catholic culture, of the Catholic identity. Maybe our buildings, our aging buildings need to be addressed, and board members can begin to look at that. So we have all these operational areas that we need to be overcoming and trying to work at. But the bottom line, we're about forming, informing, and transforming young people to become holy men and women. So don't get discouraged if, oh, wow, we're focusing just on facilities. We're focusing on just finances. We're focusing on enrollment management. That is helping so much in making sure that our schools truly are educating young people to become holy men and women. I wonder if there's any questions at this time.
Thinking that it's important, like that question, what's in it for me, even though that sounds very selfish, but we have to think like that when we have people involved with the board. What's in it for them? It's a reward.
Absolutely. And hopefully they walk away very satisfied. You know, in the Constitution and bylaws here in the Archdiocese of Hartford for local school boards, there are 2 terms, 2 3-year terms. I would hope that at the end of the second term, people are leaving recognizing, wow, I made a significant contribution to that Catholic school. I made a significant contribution to the church. I think that's very important. You know, there are 2 types of committees. The committee structure contributes to the efficient operation of the board. It is impossible to address all the work of the board without using the committee structure. The committee structure is also a way to recruit new members to the board and provide opportunities for members of the school community to become involved in the board work. Committees research, organize, and present needed information so that the board can take action on particular issues. The committee member may include both non-board members, which is very important, I'm going to talk about a little bit later, or board members. The chair of each committee must be a board member, and they're represented on the full board. There are 2 types of committees, standing and ad hoc. The standing committee provides continuity for the ongoing operation of the board. The ad hoc committee is established to meet specific objectives at a given time. Non-board members of an ad hoc committee do not actively participate in the board's agenda after presenting the report. But I will talk a little bit about sometimes you need to have that ad hoc committee. Maybe there is an issue that came up. Perfect example. You now have a new pastor at the school, at the parish. Maybe an ad hoc committee is formed of trying to integrate that pastor into the life of the school, meeting the parents, working with the board. That is the job of that ad hoc committee. There are several standing committees to be considered, such as an executive committee, a mission and evangelization committee, a strategic planning committee, an enrollment management and marketing committee, finance committee, advancement committee, facilities committee, and nominating committee. And later on in this presentation, I'm going to kind of review each one of those committees. But I will tell you now, I believe the most important committee is the nominating committee. It is that committee that really has to find the right people on the board with the skills and the expertise and the experience that can move the mission of the Catholic school forward. I do want to share a little bit about the mission.
Now that you are mentioning membership on the board, there's a question that relates to what you just said.
Sure.
Someone in our audience wants to know, what's the right balance between parents and community members on a school board?
Right. Very good question. I recommend no more than a third of parents. However, there may be situations that you may have to have a little bit more. I think a third is sufficient, and I believe you do need to have parents on the board. But be careful. Make sure when you interview these parents, there's not a hidden agenda. And I'll talk a little bit about that interview process when we get to the nominating committee. Regina, I say one-third, and that's based on some of the research that I have used, and we have put it into the Constitution and bylaws for the local boards here. Do you have any other research out there that may be different from what I'm saying?
Well, just some personal experience. Some boards do not allow any current parents, only past parents and other members. So you have to realize what's best for you. And I have a tendency to go along with what Dale says, that a percentage, I would say a third is very good, because they're the folks that really have the skin in the game, and they can influence and work with the board, understanding firsthand how this is impacting the families.
So let me move on to the committee structure and look at what is the role of the chairperson, what's the membership like, job descriptions and procedures, plan, goals, and tasks, and I'm going to share with you some forms and some minutes and what the minutes would look like. The chairperson. I want to talk about the chairperson, who is the chair of the board, and the chairperson who is the committee member on the board, the chair of the committee. Let me talk about the board chair. I believe the board chair has a very important responsibility to keep the committee chairs moving forward. On our board, the chair of the board consistently contacts the committee chair to make sure that they're moving forward with their established goal and that they are ready to present their report, their written report, at the full board meeting. It is important, though, that the chair of the committee is also very well organized and able to move his or her committee, forward. Now, how many people can serve on a committee? I recommend no more than 3 or 5. You get more than that, it becomes unmanageable at times. In the committee, as you work with do committee work, I want to emphasize the importance of education, data, and other resource. So you are going to be on the finance committee. Have you taken out some of the work that has been done by Sister Dale McDonald from the National Catholic Education Association regarding finances? Or Regina Haney with regards to finances from boards and councils? Then you need to look at some of the data, local data, regional data, and maybe even diocesan data as you look at finances for the school. And I'm sure your diocesan office can help you with that. But I think it is very important as you make some decisions in the committee that you can support those decisions being driven by data. Reasons why you should have non-members on your committee. First of all, let's go back to the one school, 5 parishes. Now, you're on the finance committee. You're a chair of the finance committee, but you need people to serve on that. Wouldn't it be great that you would go out to those 5 parishes, talk to the pastors and say, Pastor X, do you have somebody in your parish that could serve, that has the experience and expertise in finance and the time to give to serve on this school board? Hopefully, each of the pastors could give you a few names. I think that's very important to get other people in the community, whether it be, and you can also get some parents on those committees, whether it be parents, alumni, parishioners, business people. What you want to do on the committees there is to build up some people with experience and expertise. But at the same time, what I like is that you begin to see how they operate on the committee, and maybe down the line they will be serving on the full board.
Dale, I'm thinking when you were suggesting possible members of the committee, what about building a relationship with the Homeschool Association and have those members? Because one of the questions that has come into us is, how do we relate the board to the Homeschool Association? So I was thinking that's one way. I don't know what you would want to add to that response.
Sure, thank you, Regina. With the Homeschool Association, I always believe that they could be an ex officio member, the chair of the school board, and they give a report each time the full board meets. However, when we talk about the Homeschool Association, I'm assuming every parent in the school is a member of that association. Every parent has a responsibility to be a part of that. And so, yes, you want to tap into the parents of the Homeschool Association, maybe to serve on various committees and even ad hoc committees. Again, it is important that you have people that are non-members, but always the chair of the committee will be a member of the full board. The executive committee really is the steers the board. And so that really consists of the school leadership and officers of the board. Their role, though, is to get the board moving, get the standing committees moving. Again, the chair of the school board should be in constant contact with the chair of the committee. Also, the executive committee is in charge of getting the agenda going, working with the school leadership and preparing for retreats, helping with the education of the board, but being able to always be the sounding board if committee chairs are having difficulty moving their board forward. Executive committees are very, very important, and sometimes they're not listed in their bylaws as a committee, but it is a very important committee. The next committee, one of my favorites, is the Mission and Evangelization Committee. Now, if you're on a school board now and maybe you don't have a Mission and Evangelization Committee, maybe you do, maybe you have a Catholic Identity Committee, I wonder what type of work you've done this year using the joy of the gospel, Pope Francis's exhortation on the vision of our church. I think that's a document that's very important for board members to be aware of and have knowledge of. I think it's great to, on the Archdiocesan School Board, we are reading a chapter every time we meet, and the first 20 minutes, part of our prayer, is discussion with regards to what inspired us in that chapter. I think that's very important, that the board is up to date with some of the documents of the church. I think as we look into the 15-16 school year, let's be aware of what the Pope is asking us to move forward on, the Year of Mercy. And speaking of the Year of Mercy, I think about what the Finance Committee could do with regards to, say we have a school and there are 15 students in the classroom, and you could probably afford to have 10 or 5 or 10 more. But the tuition, people can't afford the tuition. A family comes and says, I can't afford $4,500 for my child, but I can afford $2,000. Somehow we have to make it where we can have that child come into the school for $2,000. Now that's probably some policy work or procedures that the Finance Committee could work with the school board. But I say that because I think it relates to what the Pope is saying about mercy, that fairness and justice does not always equate to mercy. And so sometimes a principal worries and says, how can I offer this family $2,000, where tuition is $4,500 and everybody's paying that, and I could go back and say, but you know what? What are the needs of each of those families? Maybe that family with the $4,500 has some means to pay that, but the family with the $2,000 does not. How important it is that we look at mission and evangelization. The other piece that's very important is that periodically this committee should be looking at the mission of the school and making sure that it is relevant to today. That hopefully none of you are in a school that you still have the mission of 30 years ago, because the language has changed. Maybe in your mission, how are you using the word evangelization or the new evangelization? And instead of saying children, are you using young people? Instead of using the word service or service learning, because those are words that can also be used very easily in public education. But what about faith and action for social justice? Instead of using the word quality, are we using the word excellence? Quality education or excellence in education? Instead of saying a good school, are we saying a great school? So I think mission and evangelization can truly be a help in the formation of the school's mission and the revision. The other committee would be the Strategic Planning Committee. Now that's a very challenging committee and a lot of work that has to be done. And a lot of people say, wow, how do I get started on that? Well, maybe your diocesan office has a template in which you can use in developing your strategic plan. Maybe the diocese already has a strategic plan, and all the school has to do is kind of tweak it to meet their local needs. Maybe you would look into NCEA, and I know that Regina Haney has templates and also information with regards to how to get a strategic planning going. But strategic planning is very important. Without a plan, we perish. And we certainly don't want our schools to perish. I also believe it's important that people that are on the Strategic Planning Committee have some background in strategic planning. They can read and analyze data, because that's going to be very important too as you develop that strategic plan, as you become innovative and move forward. Another very important committee is the Enrollment Management and Marketing. Again, data is important with this committee. Reading town demographics, going to the Chamber of Commerce and getting the demographics and saying, okay, why is enrollment going down? Well, it may be out of your control. Maybe it truly is. There are not school-age children. So what do we need to do to make some changes? I know one school that they realize in their town that for right now, the enrollment for intermediate and junior high is going down, but we see growth in early childhood. But we can't keep classrooms with only 2 or 3 kids. So for the time being, they're creating multi-age classrooms. Well, the board kind of asked the principal to look into that because they were able to provide some town demographics. I think it's very important. Also, you're that one school with 5 parishes. What's the infant baptism rate that's going on in those parishes? Are you putting a lot of energy in one parish that only had 1 infant baptism rate this past year versus the other parish 3 miles away that had 35 infant baptism rates? What's that data telling you? And what type of community should you be reaching out? Very important for that Enrollment Management Marketing Committee to really understand data. Now, also what's important is how do you market that school? We can say 100% graduate, 97% of them go on to higher education. What are we doing as far as learning? I'm finding out people are very interested in the learning that's taking place in the school. They like the data, don't get me wrong, that's important, but they want to see the integration of teaching and learning with technology. They want to see STREAM programs. They want to see leadership programs. And those are the things you need to market, capitalize as a board. You need to analyze what is going well, what can sell our school, who is our targeted audience, and that committee can help the school move forward. Now, what if you have somebody on the school that's employed by the school that is the advancement director or the enrollment management or and doing marketing? They should be serving as one of your members on your committee. They're not the chair, they're not on the board, but they're part of that standing committee. So you certainly want to bring that advancement director in, and your marketing person and your enrollment management person to serve on some of these committees. Which brings me to the next one, is your finance committee. And the important part of the finance committee, you know, the finance committee, if it's done correctly, they're working with the school administration, if it's a parish, working with the pastor, maybe even the finance committee of the parish, to really come up with a solid and doable financial plan for the school. So when the principal or the chair of the board, and hopefully it would be more of the chair of the board or the finance chair of the committee, comes and meets with all the parents to announce the tuition, to announce where the finances are going in the school, where each level, they can say that in consultation with the finance committee and by the approval of at the recommendation of the full board, this is what we are going to do with our finances next year, and you're transparent about it. See, what happens, instead of just the principal saying it with a letter or the principal announcing it, turn it over to the finance chair of the committee or the chair of the board and let them say, in consultation with the finance committee and at the approval of the full board, this is the direction we're going in financing our school and the finances of the school for next year. Again, the bookkeeper or the finance director of the school should be a member of that standing committee, just as well as the advancement and the development director should be as well. And the advancement and development director, advancement development committee, I think you have a big task, especially when I talked about these aging buildings. And maybe a few of you are in very newer buildings, but here in New England, we have aging buildings. And so sometimes we have to do some capital campaigns to do what I call a facelift of some of our buildings. And this is a good place for the Advancement and Development Committee to help to strategize what do we need to do to put together a capital campaign. The next would be the Facilities Committee. And I'm not too far from Newtown, where the tragedy of 21 little ones were killed a few years ago. And so it's very important for us that the facilities committees here in the Archdiocese, they really focus on a comprehensive safety plan. I think that's very important, that on a committee that you have a facilities committee. Now, the maintenance person may be serving on that committee as well. Maybe the parish maintenance person may be serving on that. Maybe you'll have some business people that would serve on that finance committee. If you have somebody from in your area from Lowe's or Home Depot, maybe the chair of that committee could go out there, talk to the manager and say, hey, you have a Catholic school in the town. We need somebody that could really help us to work with us in facilities. Maybe you've built that relationship that Lowe's or Home Depot are going to be able to support the school in many ways that you didn't expect. The final committee is the nominating committee. Again, in my opinion, one of the most important committees of the school board. Because what you're going to do on the nominating committee, you're going to seek those best people that can serve on the full board. You're going to go and tap into and recruit. Now, how do you do that? People say, how do you go about doing that? Here you are, the one school in the town with 5 parishes. You're going to make sure that there is something in each of the parish bulletins to recruit members that we're looking for. Here's an example. I'm looking for people who have strategic background. I'm looking for people with finance background. I'm looking for people with a business background. They will please contact so-and-so, the chair of the nominating committee. They contact that person. The chair of the nominating committee goes out, meets with this committee, says, let's interview some of these people. You have this interview, you talk about the board, you talk about their skills, what they can bring to the board, their expertise, their experience. Tell them a little bit about what you're going to be going as far as a board. And then after the interview, if the committee is excited about these people, you call them back and say, we're really excited. We want you. We feel you can contribute to the board. Would you serve on our board? And if they say yes, you tell them, well, we would like to bring your nomination to the full board, give our recommendation. Once the full board agrees to it, then the person in authority will approve it, and we will make that recommendation. Now, here's the key. Once you get this board once you have these new members, don't have them come to the first meeting and they've never been orientated to your board. It is very important that that nominating committee has an orientation for the new board. What I usually do is I bring the nominating committee, we bring board members, and we go out to dinner, and I have a binder for each one of them. And now, I think down the line, I'll probably have an iPad for each one of them because we're putting everything now electronically. But I give them copies of our minutes, our agenda. Well, I don't do it. I will say the chair of the nominating committee gives copies of our previous minutes, what an agenda looks like, what our goals look like. We have a mentor for each new board member. So when they come to the board, you're starting on a board, you don't want to ask anything foolish. You can go to the mentor and say, tell me what happened here. Could I have contributed here? That is key. That is key to have an orientation for your new members. I'm going to stop here for a moment and see if there's any questions.
Dale, there is one question that I think relates to what you're saying, and it came in earlier. So you're talking about various committees, you're talking about the board in general, and the question says, what are the best practices to keep a positive atmosphere amongst those people, the board, the committees, and I think this is a good piece, the stakeholders. How do we build that positive atmosphere?
Regina, that's a great question, and I would say I turn that over to the principal, even the pastor. Are you affirming these people for their work? Just send them some notes. Regina is very good on committees that I've seen her work on, that she sends little notes to them, even with a Starbucks card sometimes. Those are the things that people need to know that they are appreciated. The other thing is stay in communication. These members don't want to know that they read something in the paper and you never told them that there was going to be a school that may be closed. Or I'm saying that on a diocesan level, or that even you won a big championship game and they're reading it in the paper and you never told them. You never sent them the excitement of the news about your school. Or that you just came in first and second place in the spelling bee in your town. Don't let them read it in the paper. And I believe that the principal, even working with the board chair, should be reaching and having constant communication with the board of telling them the good news, even when there may be a tragedy, a death of a teacher. I hate to say that, but you don't want them to read that in the obituary. You want to be able to communicate to the board so they know that they're appreciated, that you entrust them with some information, and that you also appreciate the work that they're doing. The other thing is on the board chair, you have major events at the school. I think it's important that when the board is present or members on the committee that are present at these different events, they're being recognized for their contribution. The other thing that I think is important is your website. Putting down the names of the board members, putting down the goals of each committee, and the people that serve on each committee. Very important that they're being recognized for their work, but it's also an accountability piece, that people can say, oh, so-and-so is on the finance committee, so-and-so is on the facilities committee. You keep on bringing them to the forefront, recognizing their contribution to Catholic education. They're volunteers, they're giving up their time. Committee work. Committee chairs need to make sure that there are reports that are given and recommendations. Later on, I'm going to show you what one of those forms look like. You need to maximize your committee. You need to make sure you stay focused with your goal. And you have to remember that the committee does not approve if there's any policy, but they make recommendations for approval to the full board because they've done their work. Your committee reports should always be submitted in writing. It should be held with the secretary of the board, and the reports should really describe everything that you're doing. And here's a sample that I'm going to give you of what your report should look like. The title of your committee. So you're the finance committee. The dates that you've met. Who's the members on that? Always remember to put your goal there so you stay focused. That's that goal that you may have set at your retreat. Some of the actions that your board has done, some of those committee actions. And what are some of the recommendations that came out of it? And then is there going to be a motion that you want that the chair is going to bring to the full board to approve? What are some actions required by the board for approval? Very important. This is a sample form, and I know that it will be sent to you. Here's a sample committee planning. Here you go. You have the mission formation and the evangelization committee. Our goal this year is to critically look at the mission statement and does it meet the needs of today's learner in Catholic school. What are you going to do? You're going to have some action strategies. You're going to probably get some samples of mission statements going on the web. You'll have one person that will do that. You'll have another person that will probably go out there and do a survey with parents. And what are some of the results? So you'll have these different strategies. Different people on the committee will do that. But in the end, you're going to bring some recommendations forward for the mission statement, to the point that you're even going to ask the board to approve these recommendations, and making sure that your mission statement is relevant to today's Catholic school. Here's a sample of what a finance plan would look like. Again, you notice that they have a task, the issue is school finance, the resources that they need, and each committee should be doing that, having some sort of a plan. Here's what your sample board meeting agenda would look like. You know, hopefully you send your reports. The chair of the committee must send the report to the secretary and the chair of the board, basically the executive committee. And before the full board meeting, I would say 2 to 3 weeks before the full board meeting, all these documents are sent with the agenda. So people are reading it. You're not going to read your report right there. You're reading it, and then the chair of that committee entertains any questions that they may have, or may want to add a few more things to it. Very important that you send your reports ahead of time. Don't go to a board meeting. And now I realize there may be something at last minute that is very rare that you have to hand out, okay? But don't go and hand all these out and talk about it there, or read your report. Kind of summarize the chair, because you've done all this great work. Also, what's important is that if you are voting on an action, at the end of the night where it says summary of action, usually we have the vice chair reviewing the summary of action, and those summary of actions are posted on our website. We don't post minutes, but we report summary of actions to show the people the work that the board is doing. So you would have a summary of actions on your website of the work of the board. I caution you, do not post your minutes. I would say summary of actions. They're bulleted items of what has been approved by the board.
Dale, Listening to you, I think what you're saying would help this next question. There's a trend across the U.S. of renewing Catholic school governance structures. And I think a big piece of it is that we have committee-driven boards. But let's go back to that agenda where you're advocating for fewer reports, less time on reports that would allow for a rich conversation. So we have consequential boards, boards that are talking about an important issue for the future of the school. Did you want to add to what some of the other trends are for boards today?
Sure. First of all, I think we can go into each one of them. We can talk about governance. We can talk about what is it in the leaders that we're looking at. We can look at trends that are happening in our Catholic school. Even though I don't see the board taking an active role in the curriculum of the school, because I think that's left up to the principal and to the faculty, I still think there should be some discussion because, remember, the board members are the advocates for the school. And so it's important for board members to know what's happening, especially in the area of learning. What does blended learning mean? And I'll tell you, 10 years from now, we're going to drop the word blended. It's going to be learning because blended learning is going to be part of the way we go. And so, we have to talk about that. We have to talk, again, about how do we deal with some of the Latino community coming into our schools, and how do we welcome them? How do we become a welcoming environment? I'll tell you some sensitive issues that we're going to have to deal with and maybe talk as a board is how do we deal with gay and lesbian students? How do we deal with students dealing with gender identity? Those are very touchy situations, very sensitive situations, but I think they have to be talked about and discussed.
I think we have to give ourselves time to do that. We bring these great people around the board table and we don't use them. We don't enable them to add value to the ultimate result of our school and for the students. And you brought up some wonderful examples, especially the quality of the education. The boards need to know what are the aggregate scores. How are we doing in contrast to? So that they were great points, Dale. Thank you.
Certainly I would want the principal to give an academic overview of what's happening in the school, but I also would want to say what are some of the innovative things happening in Catholic in education in general. Big issue that I know in the last 2 years could have been the discussion of Common Core. Well, do we adopt Common Core? Do we adapt Common Core? Do we align Common Core? And why are we doing that? I think a very important piece. What about standardized testing? What's going on? The other piece that I think is important that the board needs to be educated on, and probably this could be an ad hoc committee of the board, how are we dealing with some legislative issues? See, in Connecticut, we have busing, but we can only bus within the towns. In New York, they have busing, but they bus within 15-mile radius of the school. So interdistrict transportation is not available here in Connecticut. Let's talk about this. Let's talk how do we get our board engaged in legislative issues as well that can benefit education for Catholic schools, that can benefit education for children. Remember, we're about forming young people to become holy men and holy women.
And Dale, I would add to that whole having rich conversations and those wonderful examples you gave us to, board has to assume the leadership for the strategic planning. Not that they do all the planning, but they would be the initiators, they would approve of the plan, they would approve of the committees, and also serve on committees. So Dale talked about a committee of the board, planning committee, but remember the board is the leader of strategic planning for the school. So it's a committee-driven board is a trend, consequential boards, grappling with great questions, the what-ifs, strategic planning, and I would add evaluation. making sure boards evaluate each meeting and evaluate their performance for the year. There's some trends that I want to put out there to answer that question. I'm sorry, Dale, you're next.
The other thing, as you were speaking, sometimes the board would say, what role do we have in the hiring and in the termination of the administrator? You know, and it really depends on the bylaws and the type of board you are on. In Hartford, we have consultative boards, and we ask that they could be members of the search committee. But the board in and of itself is not the search committee. But members of the board will take part in the search committee, and I would expect that those members who are on the board will come back to the full board and asking, what are the qualities you want to see in our next principal? And so where it may be in a board of limited jurisdiction or a full jurisdiction board, they are the search committee for the new administrator, and they go and reach out to various constituent groups. I'd like to
and to involve your board in succession planning. That goes along with what Dale said. What about the future? How are you planning for the next leader?
Absolutely. I'd like to share with you a wonderful video. It's about 3 minutes long, but it kind of recaps everything we've been talking about. So enjoy this video.
It starts with preparation. It starts with really designing an agenda that is thoughtful. I think you should view every board meeting like an event, like a retreat. You should know what it is you're trying to accomplish, how you want people to feel during and after the meeting, what you want as the end result of every different discussion items. The board chair has to be a facilitator. All great board meetings are interactive, in my opinion. It's when directors are talking amongst themselves about something, and the answer, the solutions that are coming out is bigger than, greater than any one individual could have walked in with. So that interactive nature, it takes a good board chair to facilitate that and make sure everyone's participating. Sometimes the board chair has just got to start at his right and say, I want to hear from every single person, on this issue, and go right around the room, because it's really an obligation to participate in those types of meaningful discussions.
We often break up into smaller groups and allow people to talk. Before we did that, we found that some people sit and let others do the work. The other thing that has really helped our board meetings become more effective is that I'm doing a lot less reporting. We use what's called a consent agenda. And what that means is that before the board meeting happens, we send out all the updates that the committees and I want to do, and people are expected to have read them in advance. And the board itself is a working board meeting, where instead of asking for updates from everybody and hearing a lot of talking heads, we're actually asking for advice from the board and digging deep on issues that face the organization.
In my own board meetings, we begin with the discussion, the big issues, and we actually conclude the meeting with the fiduciary and legal oversight pieces, so that the maximum energy is directed towards forward thinking, opportunities, challenges, and we cover the necessary fiduciary and legal, but it's not preferenced.
I also think that every effective board meeting is evaluated in some format. I'm not talking about a 100-question, survey, but rather a simple 3x5 card where you ask board members, what's the most important thing that we talked about? What's the least important thing that we talked about? And then finally, I guess, after an evaluation, I think a good board chair will summarize the major conclusions of the meeting and summarize any actions that the group has agreed on, so that when we walk out of the room, we all know what it is we've agreed on and what we're going to do now between now and the next board meeting.
It's really important that board members enjoy the board experience, that they actually have fun together. We actually build in, at my organisation, Social Venture Partners International, we build in time for board members to come in the night before, to have dinner together, where frankly we really don't talk about work that much. But we build relationships, trust, friendships, we take that atmosphere into the room the next morning, and people leave the meeting, I hope, feeling more stimulated and energized than when they arrived in it. A board meeting where people leave feeling drained and tired is a board meeting that has failed in its purpose.
There are quite a number of resources available through the National Catholic Educational Association or by contacting Regina Haney. And so please utilize those resources. And she certainly is the expert on school board. She's our, I say she's our guru for school board and school board development. Tonight's webinar, I hope that we've accomplished a lot with regards to how to establish a committee-driven board. Remember, the board is so important for Catholic education. I believe the board fulfills what Vatican II talked about, empowering the laity in the decision-making. The committees really help the full board to advance the ministry of Catholic school education. So all of you who are on tonight that are members of a committee or members of the board, thank you for your service to Catholic education, for your good work. And know that we have a lot ahead of us as we continue to advance this beautiful ministry in forming, informing, and transforming young people to become holy men and holy women. God bless you and have a wonderful evening.
Thank you so much, Dale, for sharing with us your passion for committee-driven boards, but more importantly for your passion and commitment to quality Catholic education. Thank you for sharing and inspiring us in that regard.
Before we conclude this evening's webinar, I do invite you to visit our website at ncea.org to see the listing of a few professional development events that we will be hosting this summer. We will be taking a summer hiatus for webinars, but we hope to be in touch with you soon about future webinar dates. Thank you all for spending your time with us this evening, and thank you, Dale and Regina, for all that you have shared with us.